BalkShipyard was a very different place back in the 1960s. These rare images are part of a longer film taken to record daily life in the harbour village of Elburg. They also give a unique glimpse of how life was in the more distant past, a time when almost all work was done by hand and the need for tidiness was clearly less prevalent. The man with his hands in his pockets is Dan Bolk Sr., who ran the yard from 1927. He built small cutters, larger versions of the models seen on the floor here. As you'll see, Dan almost always had a cigarette in his mouth. Goodness knows what today's health and safety people would say about that. Or indeed, the client whose children we can see playing with the model boats. Time to get to work. Here we see Dan using a so-called curver to transform a large chunk of timber into a leeboard bollard, a vital part of the ship's construction. The coin Dan is displaying to the camera is a 1764 medallion of the Shipbuilders Guild, which he always used as a keychain. Already illegible by this time, one wonders what the medallion would have been worth today if kept in mint condition. There were no computer screens or CAD programs to consult at this time. In fact, Dan Bolk is something of a legend for his ability to build boats without even needing drawings. Know-how and experience was passed down over the generations from father to son, giving the boat builders a built-in instinct for their work. Hard graft was also required, of course. Now Dan is cutting out the leeboard bollard and using a bandsaw to create a channel. As far as we know, this bandsaw was the first piece of non-manual equipment owned by the yard. If you look closely, you will see Bart Bolk, father of the current owner, Dan Bolk Jr. Father and son toiled long hours together, and this is all a far cry from the modern setup at Bolk in Urk today. Here we see the two men working on the stern of a fishing boat. The opening is the propeller frame, which they are now levelling. We should be under no illusions about the tough life of a boat builder. A book about Elburg quotes an old fisherman saying that Dan Bolk Sr. was one of two people in the village who worked too hard. In an era where everyone laboured full on for at least 5.5 days a week, that's saying something. Dan was always at the yard before sunrise, and 14-hour days were common. Man learned in the Garden of Eden that we were going to have to earn our daily bread with blood and sweat, he would explain. Taking a holiday was never considered. When you're your own boss, taking time off only ends up costing you money. I did take the odd free day, but then went fishing. Perhaps I might have been a bit unfair on my family. Despite the chain smoking, Dan remained in robust health. I started work when I was 11, and I'm grateful that I was never sick. Good health is the greatest treasure a man can have. When he got eczema on his arm once, Dan's cure was to plunge the offending area in a barrel of hot tar. It stung terribly, but after a couple of days my arm was dry. Fortunately, this gruesome episode was not captured on camera, and instead we see Dan and Bart doing more sawing and detailing without incident. Now we move to the finishing shed behind the Bolk house, one place where Dan felt very much at home. Here the men are bending wood to fit the shape of the boat using a centuries-old method. The plank was placed into a hole in the wall and weights were put on one end. The upper side of the plank was kept moist with a wet rag to make sure it did not catch fire. Heat was applied from below in the form of wood shavings or heather. The sawhorse you see was moved in order to determine the bend of the wood. The higher you lifted the plank, the more extreme the curve would become. Nowadays, of course, long pieces of wood like this are bent into shape using steam, and the entire process is far more controlled. Whether it is really so much more accurate, though, is open to debate. Boat launches were still a simple affair at this time, and for centuries before that. The rudder was tied to the stern, and then the boat was cut loose, sliding down the slipway at full speed, while being held away from the quay with a rope where necessary. Other men would join in and offer their services as a brake. Here, the sliding way and poppets are being removed. The small boat holding down bulk is called the float, and the sliding way it stands on here is removed from under the keel and moved back onto the slipway. At this launch, we see Dan Bulk holding the boat on the quay while his son Bart cuts her loose. There may have been the odd onlooker, but these launches were a tame affair compared to modern superyacht launches. We end with a final look at Bulk's natural surroundings: fishermen on the quay, some punters in the foreground, a push dinghy, and an inland boat from the Engel family. It is as if they are waving goodbye to an era, and in many ways they were.